Words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom, they've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case against the singer, David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did this.
Before the trunk was ever opened, before the tow yard workers held their sleeves to their faces, there was a courtroom filing that reduced a 14-year-old girl to a case number. That's where this story actually begins, not with the arrest, but with the paperwork that came after it. And that paperwork is public record right now, sitting in the Los Angeles County court system, available for anyone willing to read it. Here's the visual you need to hold on to for the rest of this video. A black rubber floor mat. Underneath it, brick. And underneath that brick, according to testimony, a stain that had already soaked through before anyone thought to look. That image, something ordinary, laid down to protect a garage floor, quietly failing to hide what was happening beneath it, is this entire case in miniature. Evidence that was covered up and evidence that seeped through anyway. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence.
Over the course of 5 days in Los Angeles court. Now, the purpose of the prelim is to determine whether there is enough evidence to hold up at jury trial. And the burden of proof here in a prelim is much less than a regular trial. There, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a preliminary hearing, prosecutors only need to prove probable cause. Here's our reporter, Julia Day.
The threshold here in this preliminary hearing phase is much lower. The prosecution only needs to show a probable cause. Think of that as kind of like a 51% threshold. But if this does go to trial, in order for a jury to convict, that's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Think of that as...
Now let's walk through what a 5-day preliminary hearing actually put on the record, because the difference between what the public assumed and what prosecutors documented is enormous. Detail 1. The body was found by accident.
For weeks, the Tesla had been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old...
Not by investigators, not by a tip, by a tow yard employee who noticed a smell coming from an abandoned Tesla that had been sitting on a Hollywood Hills street for weeks. Ask yourself, how many days did that car sit there, forgotten, before decomposition made the silence impossible to ignore? Detail 2. The identity took roughly a week to confirm, because the remains were too deteriorated for a quick match. A medical examiner would later testify to finding early insect activity already present when the case reached his office. Detail 3. Law enforcement publicly named a suspect without an arrest. For months, the singer known professionally as David was described as the prime person of interest, while free, while performing, while the case built quietly behind the scenes. Detail 4. A grand jury convened in February 2026, and only after that secret process concluded did an arrest follow, months after the discovery. That gap between discovery and arrest is not incidental. It's the shape of a circumstantial case being built brick by brick before anyone moved. Detail 5. The charges themselves.
Now, it was odd. After a dismembered body was recovered in David's vehicle, and he wasn't arrested or charged, law enforcement publicly acknowledged that David was the prime suspect in the investigation into Celeste's death, but that was it. At least publicly. Behind the scenes, investigators were hard at work. In February 2026, a grand jury was called in Los Angeles County to review the evidence against David, and eventually, in April 2026, David was arrested. The LA County District Attorney filed multiple charges against him, including first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. David was then taken into custody and has since been held without bail. Like I said, we've been
First-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. Special circumstances is a phrase that sounds procedural. It isn't. It's the legal mechanism that makes a case death penalty eligible in California, even with executions currently on hold. Detail 6. Body camera footage played in open court showed deputies at the defendant's home in February 2024, responding to a missing persons report for a then 13-year-old girl.
The witness called was an LA County Sheriff's Department deputy who was called to David's home in the Hollywood Hills. Then 13-year-old Celeste out of Lake Elsinore, California, had been reported missing, and this deputy had to investigate.
So we heard from the senior deputy who actually went to the defendant's house up in the Hollywood Hills looking for this missing girl. Celeste would have been 13 at the time. We saw body camera footage of this senior deputy and his partner being let into that house by David, having a conversation with him, and then being shown photos on David's phone of Celeste. David said, yeah, he knew her. He met her online at the end of 2021. And he claimed to deputies that he hadn't seen her in months, but he pulled up her yearbook photo and said she told him she was 18 and not 13.
Now, this is important because David was charged with continuous sexual abuse of a minor.
He told them he knew her. He told them he hadn't seen her in months. Neither statement, prosecutors allege, was true. Detail 7. According to the timeline laid out by prosecutors, the relationship began online in 2021 when the girl was 11 years old.
First, let's go back to the revelations in the prelim. Now, prosecutors say David and Celeste started talking in 2021 when she would have been just 11 years old and David would have been 16 or 17. Now, they met via social media apps like Instagram and Discord, and for a while, prosecutors say their relationship remained virtual. That is, until 2023. They met reportedly for the first time in November of that year, and then tried to make it more permanent around Valentine's Day 2024. Celeste's parents then reported her missing on February 15th, 2024, and first responders did a wellness check at David's home the same month.
What started as messaging allegedly became an in-person meeting 2 years later and escalated towards something more permanent around Valentine's Day 2024, the same month her family reported her missing. Detail 8. Text messages referenced in court described a plan investigators say was named, in the exchanges themselves, Operation Awesome, a coordinated plan for her to leave home. Prosecutors say he was the one pushing the logistics, asking if her bags were packed, telling her what to bring. Detail 9. And this is where the case stops being abstract. Messages referenced during testimony indicated a pregnancy and a since-documented abortion appointment in January 2024 when she was 13.
Again, to this child, she was 13 at the time many of these conversations were documented. Having kids, he states in a text message to Celeste's number that they want 2 kids. And this came out as well. We have previously heard references to abortion and the Plan B morning after pill in their text message exchanges. But today we actually saw messages discussing an abortion appointment for Celeste in January of 2024. Now do the math there. Her birthday was September of 2010. She was 13 when this purported abortion took place.
This is the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and under California law, a defendant's claim about not knowing a victim's age is not a legal defense once actual knowledge is shown. Prosecutors argue that knowledge existed no later than February 2024 when deputies stood in his home with her photo on his phone. The moral center of this case, the phrase worth holding on to, is simple. Knowledge does not need permission to become guilt.
David Anthony Burke has taken the position that Celeste said she was 18. He didn't know she was a child, but he knew because he was told in February of 2024 that Celeste was only 13 years old. This is a strict liability crime, meaning that if he's 18 and she's 13 and they're having sexual relations, that is automatically a crime. He does not have a defense. However, he had direct knowledge of Celeste's age and continued in their sexual relationship. So I find it abhorrent that the defense attorneys are trying to put any blame whatsoever on this young child.
Say that with me, because it's going to matter again before this video ends. Knowledge does not need permission to become guilt. Detail 10. The emotional record. Text messages read into the record described a relationship prosecutors say was not one-sided. Photos, plans for a future together, discussion of children. The court also heard that in the final exchanges, she confronted him about another woman, a social media personality who has since publicly denied any romantic involvement and stated she wants justice for the victim.
That goes to the charge of alleged sexual abuse of a child, but this next part goes to motive in the alleged murder.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
Say that with me, because it's going to matter again before this video ends. Knowledge does not need permission to become guilt. Detail 10. The emotional record. Text messages read into the record described a relationship prosecutors say was not one-sided. Photos, plans for a future together, discussion of children. The court also heard that in the final exchanges, she confronted him about another woman, a social media personality who has since publicly denied any romantic involvement and stated she wants justice for the victim.
Prosecutors allege David killed Celeste on April 23, 2025. They say David called her an Uber to pick her up from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, California, and then drive her about 80 miles south to his home in the Hollywood Hills, where he allegedly murdered her. But here's where things get tricky. We can't say definitively how Celeste died.
They decided the cause and manner of death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was homicide, and they attributed her death to multiple penetrating injuries. Here's what's interesting, though. They did not identify what kind of weapon or tool caused those penetrating injuries, and they stopped short of actually calling it a penetrating injury caused by...
Prosecutors allege an Uber was arranged to bring her roughly 80 miles from her family's home to his. Afterward, cell data allegedly places his phone, and vehicle data allegedly places his Tesla on a matching route towards Santa Barbara County, the same region where her passport was later recovered. Here's your ticking clock moment.
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying...
If the timeline the prosecution laid out is accurate, Only minutes passed between her arrival and a text sent to her own phone, asking where she was, a message investigators characterize as a fabricated alibi. What kind of person builds a cover story in minutes rather than calling for help? That single gap in time may end up being the most damaging piece of circumstantial evidence in the entire case. Detail 13. The medical examiner could not determine an exact murder weapon. The manner of death was ruled homicide, caused by multiple penetrating injuries. But due to advanced decomposition, examiners stopped short of confirming the injuries came from a bladed instrument. Detail 14. The defense used that same uncertainty to raise an alternate theory in cross-examination, asking whether the injuries could have been self-inflicted and whether the examiner had explored the victim's mental health history. He testified he had not.
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. So then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition.
Detail 15. 3 chainsaws were reportedly purchased before the discovery of the remains. 2 were recovered at the property. Neither tested positive for blood. The defense used that gap, no positive test, no forensic confirmation, to challenge the state's own investigative choices. The location of the third has not been established on the record. Detail 16. Forensic testimony placed blood beneath the rubber mats in the garage, soaked into the brick below, physical evidence that the vehicle had been parked there before it was towed away. That's the image we opened with, and it's worth repeating why it matters. Covered evidence and evidence that surfaces anyway. Detail 17. A private investigator hired by the property's landlord was barred from testifying after prosecutors alleged he violated grand jury secrecy rules, a procedural fight that played out publicly in the hallway outside the courtroom, complete with an on-the-record confrontation between the investigator and the prosecuting attorney.
What to say?
I was a witness to the grand jury on 2 separate occasions, and I have to throw this in there. Beth and I don't get along. She does not want me investigating the case. She did not like that before anything was moving in this case that we put out things like the burn cage was at the house, a chainsaw. We asked why these things weren't in evidence and why there was a 4 terabytes worth of surveillance footage from the house across the street that wasn't captured, wasn't gotten before it was overwritten. And so when I was initially served, I was told that by law, and this is not the law, but I was told this, I can no longer ever speak about the case again because I'm a grand jury witness, not even to my own client. And that's simply not true. I'm an investigator. I can talk about the case, and it's the grand jurors that are bound by the secrecy of the grand jury. I can speak about my own witness testimony if I want to. I just can't speak about anything that I learned from the grand jury, which I haven't even spoken about my own testimony. The reason I have to bring that up is on the second or third day, I was in the hallway waiting to get in the courtroom, and a gentleman came up to me who I had no idea who he was, in a suit, and he said, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Celeste family's attorney, is Mr. Steinfeld. And I was sitting on the bench seats, and there's a lot of reporters around, so we went to the middle of the aisle of the courtroom, and he said some very nice things. They thanked me for keeping the story in the news, and I asked how the family was doing. And at that point, Beth Silverman came storming, and I mean storming, down the hallway and physically grabbed him, pulled him away, and said, "You are not allowed to talk to him. That is illegal." And I was really confused. And there was a lot of reporters around that were very confused what happened. But I didn't, say anything. But I didn't ultimately go in that day. But I went in the next day, and I was seated, and we were on the record already. And Beth Silverman said that she wanted to put something on the record, and she turned around and pointed to me and said, "He is not to be in this courtroom. He is broken grand jury secrecy laws. I'm having a warrant issued for his arrest." And said that he went up to the family, who are witnesses, and he knows he's not allowed to talk to witnesses. He went up to the family yesterday and was trying to talk to them. And the judge, I got to say, the judge was super professional. She said, "Listen, she can have you excluded because of the grand jury thing." She's like, "I can't get into grand jury issues." And I said, "Listen, Your Honor, I'm fine leaving. I'm completely fine. I understand." And then that's when Beth threw he was trying to talk to witnesses, and I just asked her if I could say, Your Honor, can I put one thing on the record?" And she's like, "If it has anything to do with the grand jury, please don't." And I said, "No, it doesn't." But I was actually approached by Mr. Seinfeld. I didn't even know who he was, and I didn't try to talk to them, even though I'm allowed to as an investigator. And at that time, I got to say, it was also very professional. He stood up and said, "Your Honor, I want to put on the record as well that I did approach Mr. Fisher." It was not and at that moment when he did that, Beth spun around and just started mouthing things to him, and she didn't even take the time to learn if it was the case that I came up to them. She just made these assumptions. Anyway, so I did exit the courtroom, but I'm glad it was at least put on the record that I wasn't breaking any rules or anything like that. But so, I did leave, and we'll see if I'm on the witness list or not.
Say it one final time. Knowledge does not need permission to become guilt. That is the thread running through every one of these 17 details. Not a single smoking gun moment, but a chain of documented decisions, each one made with information the defendant already had. What the judge ultimately ruled is narrow. A preliminary hearing doesn't decide guilt. It decides whether probable cause exists to proceed, a much lower bar than the standard a trial jury will eventually apply. That threshold was met. The case is moving to trial, with arraignment scheduled for the end of August, and the death penalty currently undecided by prosecutors.
The judge ultimately ruled that David's case will be taken to trial.
This was difficult evidence to even hear, but also the crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric. And it's not shocking that the evidence that would prove a horrific and barbaric crime would itself also be very difficult to deal with and to watch and listen to. But that is the evidence. We'll make sure that the jury eventually has all the evidence in order to reach a verdict in this case.
But before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
What remains unanswered is the exact sequence of events inside that house. A sequence the prosecution has said, on the record, it is not yet fully disclosed. If you want to verify any of what we just covered, the preliminary hearing transcript and the underlying criminal complaint are both filed with the Los Angeles County Superior Court and are part of the public record. Pull them yourself. And when you do, tell us in the comments. Does circumstantial evidence stack detail by detail the way we just laid it out meet your bar for reasonable doubt, or does the timeline alone close the case for you? If this breakdown helped you understand what actually happened in that courtroom, hit like, share it with someone following this case, subscribe to the Crime Infinity, and turn on notifications, because we'll be back the moment the next filing drops.